I was this close to making a South African reference with the opening hymn, Mikey, so you can afford to tick that one off. I'll make it now. Praise My Soul was the school hymn for the school that Karina and I worked in South Africa, and it's one of our favourites, so there you go, you can tick that one off. In New York, in the 19-teens, 1920s, so I appreciate none of us were there, but there were very clear rules about how gentlemen wore hats. Now, I've never been in the zone where gentlemen wear hats. My dad had a flat cap for when it was a bit chilly, then he moved to baseball caps in his later life. Anyway, but there was a very strict set of rules. From about early to mid-April until mid-September, one wore a boater, a straw hat. Panama hats were acceptable, but the boater was the thing. And then from September until April, it was a felt hat of some kind, a proper warm hat for warm weather. And it was one of those things where if you were spotted taking your felt hat off too early and breaking out the boater, then, people felt that there was something not quite right about that. Now, this is a bit of information that I've known for a while, and I was digging around, and then I had discovered the Straw Hat Riots. And this is what sold me on it. In September of 1922, New York experienced the Straw Hat Riots. The name is just brilliant in its own right. So the nominal day that everybody took off their straw hat and put their felt hat on was September the 15th. And the tradition was, because it was a straw hat that didn't last over a year, so the tradition was that you took off your straw hat and you crushed it and threw it in the bin. Reduce, reuse, recycle, not something we did in 1922. But apparently, in 1922, a group of youths, and that's how the history records, it's a group of youths, took it upon themselves to bring the date for changing hats forward by a couple of days. Now, it's not necessarily massive, but the joke was always that if people wore their straw hat a bit longer, then they kind of were asking for trouble. Somebody would come along and knock their hat off, and it was all a bit of a game. But of course, the minute you mention that a gang of youths decided to do something, you can tell where this might go. So our high-spirited youths went around New York with sticks that had a hook on them so that they could go around and wheak people's hats off and stamp on them in sort of youthful hijinks, which was all well and good until they decided to go and shame a group of dock workers from, sort of down on and that's where you can imagine, imagine your average dock worker, imagine your average youth, imagine the patience level of your average dock worker while some teen flips his hat off and stamps on it in public, and it all became terribly, terribly upsetting. Off-duty policemen were brought in, and the best part of the story is that when they arrested them, they found that a number of the youth were underage, and so they couldn't be put in jail. They had to call their parents down to administer corporal punishment in the police station. Can you imagine being phoned up by the police? Could you come down and beat your child in front of us, please, because we can't send them to prison? It's brilliantly mad, but what it did was it just triggered off this whole thing, or just worked in the idea of people shaming people, of giving them black dots. And we do it all the time. We'll walk down the street, and I know that we are very good and upright standing people, as we are here. But how many of us walk down the high street and look at what other people are wearing and going, oh, goodness me, I wouldn't allow anybody to go out dressed like that? Or something along the lines of, where did they get that from? Body shape is a fab one to be shamed about. Our political ideas, our religious ideas, our football teams. There's that great thought of a comment from Billy Connolly when he was discussing the idea that some Arab terrorist group, name anyone, was apparently trying to open a branch in Glasgow. And Billy Connolly's comment was, nobody will take them seriously, they don't even have a football team. If you're going to be a terrorist in Glasgow, you need at least a team to support. All through our collective lives, we will have been shamed at some point by someone who probably went, it's just a bit of fun, whilst our lives were being made thoroughly miserable on that day. And then you come to church. Karina and I were once at a Bible study prayer group evening where a statement was made that a good Christian woman has clean skirting boards. Now, I'll pass that on to the elders, and they can maybe do a sort of a survey, or maybe a set of Graham's doing a house visit. He can maybe come along with a pair of white gloves and I mean, when we're talking about putting a black dot on somebody, I don't know if you may be sitting here now feeling very judged by that. I don't know. I seem to remember we left the room going, "What? You're kidding?" Yeah, okay. When I was quite a young Christian, I felt the very strong pressure that apparently God only talks to people in the morning. If you don't do your quiet time in the morning, well, you'll just lose it totally. Okay. And, there was everybody I seemed to speak to was like, yes, I get up at 5 o'clock for an hour of prayer. And I'm like, whoa, you want to see me at 5 in the morning? I'm not capable of a conscious thought, let alone focus. I'll fall asleep. It'd be useless to God if I'm asleep. But there was that feeling of just, well, you're not doing it right. You're being judged all the time. So, I can walk down the street and somebody's looking at me going, bad hairdo. I come to church and then it's like, well, you didn't do your quiet time properly, did you? And there's this judgment all the time. So then we come to this reading that I want to look at today. A woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal, Mark says, under the care of many doctors, had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she now grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned round in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding around you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and trembling with fear told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Now I'm aware as I stand here today, many of us know people who have struggled, who are struggling with illness. They are struggling bravely. They are struggling patiently. And quite often with deep, deep frustrations. And on the whole, we get to the point of saying, well, we're praying, and we trust that there's an answer. And sometimes this passage might stick a bit, because this woman gets immediate healing. And we can be sitting there going, well, what about my family? Why do we not get immediate healing? And I don't have an answer right now for that. That's not what I want to talk about today. But I want to make sure that nobody feels that that's the key here. Because what I want to talk about is the shame that goes with this. This woman had been bleeding for 12 years. In Leviticus, in there are laws to cover this. wasn't necessarily an uncommon thing. The 12 years was tricky, but there were massive, 12 years. She had tried all the doctors. Now that sounds great to the modern ear. Okay, so you've gone to Dr. Graves have transferred you to ARI have sent you to a special. That sounds great, but this is the 1st century. This is 2,000 years ago. Can we please imagine what those doctors were like? These are guys who didn't even know there was a circulatory system going on. These are people who, according to one Roman medical text, reckoned that a woman's monthly period was actually just the body getting rid of excess fluid. And actually, in one textbook, it indicated that she was being overly active. That's the doctors that this woman's going to. 12 years. Herbal remedies. Various salves. One of the cures was to carry an ostrich egg around with you in a cotton cloth. That's what we do to the first years at school. We give them a bag of flour and tell them to look after it, to teach them how to look after a baby. You know, to carry an ostrich egg around with you in a cotton cloth. How is that any... You can see how her frustration has built. But in each of these cases, it just got worse. And this is a time period where they were cleansing wounds with vinegar. It doesn't bear thinking about. And each time she wasn't healed, the doctors will have looked at her and said, well, what are you doing wrong? You mustn't have carried the egg properly. Did you put the salve on 25 times a day as required? No, I missed it twice. Ah, well. And the shame will have piled onto her because this is her fault. Especially remembering in a patriarchal society where she was really a second-class citizen to begin with. 12 years. And for 12 years she has been unclean. For 12 years she has not been anywhere near the synagogue because she can't enter the synagogue because she is unclean, because she has blood. For 12 years, every bed she has touched, every chair she has sat on has been declared unclean, which means that her house would probably had a wee fence round it by now. Anyone who touched her would have been declared unclean for the rest of that day. This woman hasn't been hugged for 12 years. Such a simple thing. And all that shame piling on her. The whole village going, oh, it's her. Black sticker. And then she heard about Jesus. And she came up behind him and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. She comes to Jesus with superstition in her mind. She doesn't come to Jesus looking for the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, or Savior. She comes to Jesus just knowing, if I touch his cloak. In England and France, and I'm using England quite particularly, England and France, up until the early 1700s, there was a very firm belief that touching the king would cure illness. There's a specific illness known as the king's evil. It's actually scrofula. It's a form of TB. So it's just, lumpy stuff. And the belief was, if you touch the king, you would be cured. What's really strange is that there are actually some records of people who claimed they had been cured by this. Various kings tried to stop it. James VI was one of them when he arrived in England and was told, at your coronation, you've got to go and touch all those lumpy people outside. I'm afraid our Scottish James went, no, I don't touch people. But his son was quite happy to do it, so it continued right up until sort of Queen Anne time. But the idea was that you could just heal by touch. Why? Because the king was God's divinely appointed leader, so it must work. It's absolute superstition. And that's how this woman comes to Jesus. She's not like Nathanael with some theological question. She just believes that if she touches that cloak. She hasn't prayed the sinner's prayer. She's not recognizing him as Lord. She is a desperate, frustrated, and deeply ashamed woman who is basically on her last thread. And equally, imagine, she She's in public. And the record suggests that people are crowding round her and crowding round Jesus. She must be trying to keep out of everybody's road because she knows if somebody touches her, they are unclean. So she must be trying to make herself as small as possible just to reach out. It's not like she can announce the problem she's got. Now, at this stage, all Jews wore an outer cloak with 4 particular tassels. It's dictated as what was supposed to be worn. It's, in the book of Numbers, it's there. Although my head automatically goes to Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof when he points out the prayer shawl at the start of Fiddler on the Roof. But the point is the same. That outer cloak is there to show devotion to God. And that's what this woman is desperate to do, is just get close to God. For 12 years, she hasn't been to synagogue. 12 years, she hasn't been able to worship God. She'll have been told God doesn't do house calls because God is in the synagogue. And now there's this Jesus chap. And if you'll pardon the expression, this is her last-ditch Hail Mary. This is her last-ditch attempt to get something. And immediately, Mark records, immediately her bleeding stopped. She felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Now, as I said earlier, I know that word immediately must creak with many of us. Because we know friends and family who have not had immediate healing. But this was immediate. This is what Jesus wanted. The miracle that she so wanted. And she was freed. No more unclean. No more rejection. Nothing holding her back, because that's what freedom means when Jesus does it. And I love the line that says, she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Such a small thing. But that means to me that Mark either talked to her or talked to someone who knew her. That's a detail that you don't get unless you've actually heard it from her. It would have been so easy for Mark to write, immediately her bleeding stopped and she was freed. Yeah, easy. But that extra bit, someone spoken to that woman and she said, I knew, I could feel it. I could feel it in my body. There was something different. Her shame is gone from that moment. Her shame is gone. She can start again. Mark continues though. Once Jesus realized that power had gone out of him, and he turned round and said, who touched my clothes? And the disciples were like, you're kidding, boss, really? The disciples. Our friends, the disciples. We as normal humans very often look at the disciples and recognize, like, oh yeah, that's what I do quite often. Peter with his big mouth that says things that doesn't quite stand up, but then equally who rushes off into water when he sees Jesus. Thomas who doubts. Andrew who thinks things through carefully. Here, they're well-meaning, just flawed. Jesus, we can't tell you who touched you. There's hundreds of them. What are we supposed to do? But Jesus knows something happened. He knows that of all the people crowding around him, and half of them at least must have been touching a bit of his clothing, someone got something from him. Power had gone out from him. Now, that might make Jesus sound like the latest addition to the Marvel universe. Power going out from him. But that's not what it is. The important bit is that Jesus knows that it cost him something. Someone had been healed, and he knew about it because it had cost him something. It's not an accident, and Jesus knows it. Jesus knows the cost. He knew the cost of that woman's healing, just as he knew the cost of walking up a hill with the cross on his back. He knew the cost he would pay. It's not an accident that woman was healed. It's not an accident that we can find salvation. It's part of a plan. But it's part of a plan that has a direct cost. And then we come to that last piece. Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. He's not going to give up. There's It's not like, well, you know what, I'll find later. No, no, he keeps looking for her. And then she realizes, oh, right, okay. So she goes, knowing what happened to her, came and fell at his feet and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. He will not be put off. Jesus does not give up on us. But imagine again that woman. Years of hiding, years of being excluded, years of all that shame that people have piled on her because she doesn't do the right things. And now she's free, and suddenly Jesus wants to speak to her. What if he's angry? What if there's something that she has to do to make this stick? What if he wants to know the whole medical history behind this? And her fear of just like, oh, right. But she goes through it and confesses to him, tells him the whole story. Because at the end of the day, from her point of view, maybe she's aware, well, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that I go back to my house, close the door, and nobody speaks to me. So actually, I can tell him this because I feel something in my body. Something has worked. I need to tell him the truth. And that's the way that Jesus works. There's no anger from him. There's no, you took power from me. No. He just wants to chat with her. Not to confirm what he did, but to confirm it for her. He listens. And in that way, he ensures that she knows this is a healing that will stick. If he had just walked away, well, I'll find it later, she would have doubted. There'd always be that niggle in her mind, what if? But Jesus turns and goes, no, I'm going to speak with you. Okay, you've told me this, I'll listen to the whole story, because that way, in listening, I can confirm this sticks. You are free. He frees her once and for all. He frees her from all the bleeding. It will not return. He frees her from all the shame that she has felt for 12 years. There's no takey-backsies. It's real. And then he asks, and he says to her, go in peace. Don't worry this one through. Don't overthink this on your way home. This is real. Go now. You see, shame is created by people, not by God. The little black dots, they're created by people. They're created by a society because you don't fit in. You walk differently. You comb your hair differently. That's the way society does things. Little black dots are created by families. Because that's families. We have a standing joke in my family. Go and visit my mum in her nursing home. One of her first questions, most visits, when are you shaving your beard off? I'm not. It's looking worse. Good. Now, that was Christmas. Our Christmas meal. Your beard's looking worse. Okay. It probably was a bit straggly, I'll give it that much, and maybe I hadn't combed it properly that morning, but families, we love giving black dots in the family for some reason. Workplaces give black dots. Have you not done that yet? Why haven't you done that yet? Because I'm doing the other 5 things. But we need that. Okay, I'll get to it. And churches, well, yeah. I think worldwide, the church as an organization, as a family, worldwide, the church needs to acknowledge we're very good at handing out black dots sometimes. And that's not actually what God wants. God doesn't create shame. If he did, Peter would still be on a beach, speechless, when Jesus walks up to him and says, so, do you love me? Uh-huh. No, really, do you love me? Uh-huh. 3rd time, do you love me? Yeah? Good, then let's move on. If there was shame involved in that conversation could not have happened. In Jesus, there is only listening to what we say, listening to our confessions of our past, and then freedom. Freedom and forgiveness in new life, just as we celebrated at communion. Because that's how he works. If we're sitting here today needing to reach out and touch the hem of his garment, I urge you not to leave without doing so. There's no shame in doing that. There's just freedom from all that you've been and all that you have, and a gift of new life. Amen. As we close together, let's sing How Great